So I'm gonna do a short review on David's new CP lubricants. So there's C and D. Let me just open this. So according to David, C is for stabilization and D is for speed. So I'm gonna try these two loops on 4 cubes, which is the 3x3, Pyraminx square 1 and 5x5. The only reason I'm trying with this is because there are the driest ones. So I will be recording some solves after I loop them.
For 2-battery, I'm just using the YS2M as the testing cube, and I only put in the type D loop. Before putting the loop in, the cube was fairly slow, but after I put in about 2 drops, it became moderately fast. David mentioned about the loop that type D is a speed loop, but it does not sacrifice control to the cube, and I absolutely love that. It's a different feel from the other speed loops I have. However, it did take me time to break it in since it's a very thick loop, and it took me about 20 solves, I think, to break it in. Overall, on Tibeti, it's a very nice loop to use. Now for Pyraminx. I only put in the type C loop because this Pyraminx I'm using, which is this qiyi MS, is a fast cube even though it's dry. David mentioned type C is more of a control loop, but it does not give the cube a slow and gummy aftermath after a few solves. This loop is also thick just like type D, so it also took me time to break it in. Overall, I think this loop is a very good bare bone control loop without even mixing it with other loops. I don't have many other control type loops to compare it with other than again number 3 loop and justlube plush. But this loop is definitely my favorite out of the 3. Next up is square 1. I put both types of lube in the square 1, which is the MGC obviously. I put the type C lube on the inner tracks of the square 1, while type D I put mostly on the slice. The MGC when dry is ridiculously fast and uncontrollable for me, but when I only put in type C, it slowed it down way too much and I didn't really like it, but adding type D balances it out. Just with these two loops in my square 1, it became my favorite way to set up my cube, and I will definitely continue using these loops in my square 1. Lastly, 5x5. I use the Fork 5 and it's absolutely slow when dry, especially the outer layer. I put type D on the outer layer in about 3 drops and it's very comparable to my explanation with the 3x3 earlier. The inner layer, however, I put in 3 drops of type C and 1 drop of type D. I had a problem with properly turning the inner layer and aligning it on this cube before, and lubing it with these loops making it very good. Not necessarily my favorite way to set up the cube, but it's definitely up there. It did take longer to break it in due to the fact it's a big cube, but for me it's no problem honestly. So my final conclusions are, these loops are definitely going to be a favorite among many cubers using it in different types of events. It's a very well made loop, even when using both of them without any other loops. It's definitely a very good combination. I do hope, however, when this loop gets officially released, it's going to be sold in a syringe, since I find it a bit hard to put it in some small areas of certain cubes like the square one earlier because of its thickness. I'm not a chemist or whatever, but if it's possible, maybe color them so it can be easily differentiate since both of the lubes are clear. And that's all I have to say. And I have to say actually, thanks to David for making these loops and sending them to me for testing. And that's all.